Okay, so moving along. I've been doing a lot of work since the last segment. I continued to tweak on the fit of the wing assembly with the fuselage and feel like it's pretty close. And then I set about on painting and assembling all of this cockpit stuff. And I have to say that overall, this part has been a lot of fun. All of these things that go in the cockpit fit really wonderfully. Like, you know, it's little stuff like right here, this gizmo right here, that just dropped right in perfectly. Really nice fit. This little box right here, same thing with that box. Looks, you know, looks good because with that kind of fit, Eduard really makes it easy for you to paint parts separately and then get that nice, perfect color separation. And I like that on a cockpit. I like it all the time, but especially on a cockpit. So I've been really pleased. If this, you know, the whole cockpit experience so far has just been a lot of fun. As you can see, I've got the sidewall parts put in there. They dropped in pretty nicely, no adjustments necessary. This whole bit of sub-assembly that I've got done so far all went together really nicely. The colored photo etch seat belts, yeah, not completely trouble-free, but that was my fault. I generally don't mind colored photo etch seat belts. A lot of people hate them because sometimes, you know, when you bend them, the paint can pop off or whatever. But I don't have too much of that kind of issue with them. What I did do on this one, though, was as I was holding the right-hand side belt down with a toothpick and flowing some extra thin super glue underneath it, yep, stuck the toothpick to it. And when I removed said toothpick, I yanked the paint off of the pre-colored seatbelt. And that's when it's nice to do overlapping belts, because, I mean, I'm going to do it anyway because I think it looks more authentic. But it's also a great way to hide your mistakes. And I was lucky enough that underneath that brown thing there, that's where the disaster happened, and that belt was just long enough to reach over there. The belts are a tiny bit short, I feel like. They really probably should go over these bars, but they're just not, they weren't long enough to do what I wanted them to do. So anyway, it's all good. I think it's going to look nice. This thing is going to be closed cockpit or closed canopy, so I think it's all good. Even if there are a few little, goobers there. But this has all been nice. All of these parts went together really well. Matt McDougall is also doing one of these, and he said that his seat tab and slot assembly did not go together quite so well. And this gets back to what I was saying in the last episode about the, sort of distribution of sizes with parts. Some guys are going to have fit problems and others are not. So I got lucky on my copy, and all of these cockpit parts have gone together really well. It's been drama-free, except for one self-inflicted gunshot wound that I should warn you about. These little radio and battery boxes, all right? I discovered the hard way that if you are not paying attention to which side is up, okay, and the side that is not up is the side that's got these two little prongs right here, okay, you can assemble it upside down, and you can see the evidence of me doing exactly that right there. I fully glued these two boxes to the wrong side of this thing, and I didn't discover it until, I thought something was wrong, because when you do it, you have to rotate this thing such that this side of it here, the left side of it, is in between the two boxes, and they don't quite want to fit, and to the point where I was like, what the heck, this is not right. And instead of checking myself, I chopped off that little wheel thing that goes right there. Anyway, it is what it is. The point being that I did not discover what was going on until I was just, setting it on this thing on the gas tank, and just to see how it looked and how it appeared to fit. And the fuel filler spout wasn't clear in that frame, obviously, because there we go, because the frame is offset to the right. And I was like, what the heck? And then I realized, oh, wait a minute here. So yeah, that was a bit of a disaster. But the good news was that I figured that out before the Tamiya Extra Thin was fully cured, and I was able to just pry get those parts to come loose without any issues. So yeah, got lucky on that deal. And I have had several guys mention to me that they have had some issue getting this piece into the cockpit, and I had the issue, and I will explain it to you right now. So, all right, this ledge right here, this L-shaped ledge, is what this portion of the cockpit floor assembles to. Okay, so it's pretty good engineering. I like that. And you can see that what happens is that it's cradled in there, and you push it over, glue it up against that, get it all glued up against one side, and it should magically mate with the opposing side. So all is good on this on the left half of the cockpit. But when I went to try and assemble it in the same way to the other side, it wouldn't go in. And the reason was immediately clear. That slot right there between the little ridge and the bottom of these ribs was not molded quite the same as it was on the other side. And there was a little bit hanging down, like that gap right there at the tip of my fingernail was like half or 2/3 as big as it is on this side. And you can even see that same little gap there, because it obviously has to be basically just a little bit more. I mean, if there's tolerancing allowed, has to be a little bit more than the thickness of this floor piece right here, because it has to sandwich in between the ridge there and the bottom of these two things. So it absolutely would not go in on this side. And so I just chopped a little bit off the bottom of those ribs, and that cross piece still didn't quite get me there. So I relieved the edge of the floor piece a little bit. You can see there where I just filed along that, kind of put a lead-in chamfer there. And I also then took a scalpel blade and reached in there and put a chamfer on the edge of that ridge right there. And so now this piece will nestle down in there the way that it's supposed to. And since this side's just a little bit harder than the other side, I think this is the side that I'll glue it to, and then assemble the other half of the fuselage that way, because it's still just a little bit snug. Meh, this is a difficult thing to hold and show, but you can see that now it drops all the way in there. Come on, camera, focus it. It drops all the way in there like it's supposed to. I'm putting a little bit of pressure on it, but that should take care of that. So I am going to finish up all of this stuff. I'm going to put a wash on these parts, put some flat coat on them, do some highlighting, and then it'll all be ready for final assembly of the fuselage. So when we next come back to it, that's probably where it'll be. One thing that I have to decide though, okay, these parts are the inserts for the rear wheel, and they drop in nicely, and obviously you have to put those in there before you assemble the fuselage. And that caused me a little bit of heartburn out here on the outside, because I'm going to be foiling around all of that. Ideally, I would foil that door as well, but you know, that's going to be a bit of a challenge. So I have to figure out how I'm going to solve that particular part of the puzzle before I just go ahead and put all this together. I'm thinking that what I'm probably going to do is just paint the outsides of the doors, the insides of the doors, and then I'll just put some tape on them to protect them while I'm working around that with the foil. I don't know. I can't foil it before I put it together, because obviously I've got a fuselage assembly joint to deal with before I do any of that. I do think I can leave, I hope anyway, that I can leave the tail wheel out until after this is all put together, I hope. Yeah, because the tail wheel is going to go in there like that. Hopefully, I haven't checked this, but it's kind of a weird angle for that thing, but whatever. But hopefully that'll go in there with these two pieces assembled. I think it will, because I really definitely do not want to have to put the tail wheel in there until later. Yeah, I don't think there's any issue with that. Anyway, before I close out this little portion of the thing, you'll notice that I've added some alignment features for myself. Yeah, because I just knew that I was going to be dry fitting this fuselage quite a bit, and that it was just going to be frustrating. So I've just taken a little bit of 20 thousandths thick evergreen stock and given myself some alignment aids, and it does help a lot. It's nice. You can see I also put some in there to deal with that thing on the underside of the wing that I mentioned, to make sure that they slide in to the right location. So that's good. One thing that Matt showed in his video about this, because he's doing a pony bash. He's building this one, the Airfix 148th Mustang, and the Ming Mustang, although I think he's already thrown out both the Ming and the Airfix Mustangs. But one thing that I noticed when he showed the Airfix kit is they did something really clever. They've got a huge chunk of material that goes from this exhaust inlet fixture thing over to the opposing side. And the top of the cowling, basically all of this is one piece that drops on there, kind of like the Tamiya Spitfire, and maybe the Eduard Spitfire too, I'm not sure. But I really like that, because not only do you get a really robust alignment between the fuselage halves and a really solid assembly point between the two of them with that bridge across the inside of the nose right there, but it means that with that whole upper piece, all this top cowling being molded separately, that you avoid the issue that Eduard has not. All right, look at this. Okay, you can see that on the left half of the fuselage, all of the rivet detail that's close to the center line is pretty good, not bad. But on the right hand side, it fades away, as you get close to the center line. And that's because of the way that the tool opens and closes, like, straight this way. You obviously cannot have really deep features molded in right there at the center line, because it creates an undercut, and when the tool opens, they'll drag and cut the surface, and you'll have big problems. You can't have that. You can't have that either way. So what they've done on the left-hand side, though, is they've got enough draft, and the features are small enough and rounded enough that the thing pops out of the tool without any issue. So I'm going to have to, at a minimum, reinstate some rivets along here. But the other thing is that on a Mustang, this piece right here is one piece, does not have a joint. So that's got to be filled and smoothed. On the other hand, this thing right here is an actual joint where these two cowling pieces come apart. But a joint in the kit does not look like a joint in real life. So I'm going to end up filling that with sprue goo and rescribing that panel line anyway. So yeah, I really wish that they had followed Airfix's lead and made that cowling right there a separate piece. And yeah, like I said about the landing gear, if Airfix out engineers you, you really, might want to go back to the huddle and figure out how to get past that. I don't know. Okay, so I have been busily tinkering away on the fuselage subassembly, and it's in pretty good shape. There's definitely some things to discuss here. So I'll kind of work my way backwards from where I'm at with it right now. I just dry fitted the fuselage halves together and took my first stab at inserting the instrument panel subassembly. You can see I got that on there, and I guess one thing I should say is I may have used the wrong instrument panel combing, whatever you call that. It's not really clear. Let's just have a look here, because there's two of them in the kit. This is one of the many options that Eduard gives you, and I don't really know why you're supposed to pick one over the other. This one, part number 33, I think I is actually the one that I was supposed to use. Let's take a look here. I bet you anything that the little sprue map tells us that number 32, which of course is the one I used, is the one that you're not supposed to use. And yeah, sure enough, you can see right in there, looks like, yeah, number 32 in blue. Don't use it. Should have looked a little closer at that beforehand. But this is the thing that's a little bit frustrating, that Eduard does not do a real good job of telling you why you're supposed to use one over the other. I mean, on stuff like this, they tell you, yeah, these markings are those markings. But, like on this one, I've certainly seen Mustang instrument panel combing that looks like that, so I thought it was the right one. Anyway, not a big deal. I don't care. This whole project is kind of an experiment anyway, so. But don't do what I did. Use number 33, okay? Regardless, what you're probably going to find out, as I have, is that it's getting the whole thing in there is a little bit of a challenge. It does not just drop right in there as the instructions, would have you believe, because what they want you to do is put all that together and then stick it in there after, the fuselage glued together. And yeah, it's definitely not quite that easy. It's a little bit of a tight fit. I'm glad that I took the opportunity to practice, because for one thing, it's going to be almost impossible to see with the light. Maybe not. That lower portion of the thing that goes between the pilot's legs, that bumps into the control stick when you're putting it in there. So I had to just very carefully kind of twist it and put it in, and it still didn't seem like it wanted to go, and then it kind of finally dropped into place. And you can see it does fit pretty good, but getting it to that spot was a little bit tense for a minute. All right, here's another option thing you need to be aware of. Okay, if you look at, let's see here. Okay. All right, back of the seat, you can see you got an option between H50 and PE24. PE24 is like a little leather pouch, and you can see it says that H50 is marking F only. Now, F is a fairly late block, P51D 2044. Okay, if you don't know, those first two numbers in the serial number indicate the year of the contract. So the order was placed in 1944. So this is a relatively late bird. It's a Pacific bird. Again, I don't know why it would be the only one that would have that particular thing, whatever it is, on the back of the seat. But what I've been told by some guys in Scale Modelers Critique Group who are pretty knowledgeable is that that little pouch is on Swiss Mustangs only. I mean, I would never have even suspected. I have a reference photo that shows that little pouch right there very clearly. In fact, that I got from one of those guys, and he says it is in fact a Swiss Mustang in the photo. It's not at all clear, and Eduard doesn't tell you that. So just something to be aware of. I don't know the deal on that little pouch thing or what the other gizmo is. So if you know, you might say that down in the comments. All right, anyway, so moving on. I'm just going to kind of go backwards through this. I'm going to try and I want to see if it's possible to keep this dashboard piece on here when I take this thing apart. I want to see if it'll stay with this half of the fuselage, because I want to take some pictures of it with it in there, so we'll see. Probably not going to work, but worth a try. All right, so now one thing that I feel like is proving to be really important with this kit, with this fuselage subassembly, is going through it stepwise so that you add basically one thing at a time, so that you can figure out if there's a problem and then diagnose it with the least amount of variables involved. If you put all the things in at once and you have an issue with fit, it just becomes that much more difficult to to figure out which one it is. But if you're just doing one thing at a time, the process of elimination is automatic. So what I did, all right, let's see if my little trick with the instrument panel worked. Yay, there we go. All right, so what I did is I started out, I actually had this thing, this piece of with the radiator and all that already in there, and honestly I probably should not have put it in, because it makes it impossible to look through there to see this feature right here, which is what this next part of the discussion is all about. Okay, so I had discussed it before about how the cockpit floor and subassembly and everything was supposed to fit into this, along this little L-shaped ledge and go between the bottom of these ribs and that ledge and so forth. And that I had some difficulty with it on the right-hand side of the fuselage, but not as much on the other side. And I thought that the right thing to do would be to get it permanently installed on the most difficult side. So I did that over here. And again, I ended up kind of having to do that method where I put extra thin in the joint and then held it in place in all the important spots and added a little bit of super glue to make sure that it stayed put. So like you can see that down there, it's mashed all the way down as far as it's supposed to go. Same thing there, and firmly glued in up there at that top corner. And you can see that the way that's supposed to look, like there where those that pin goes through from the fuel tank, that it should basically, be right up there next to the edge of that little ridge. So I got all that in there, got it in place, and felt pretty good about it. But when I went to put the other side of the fuselage on, it just didn't want to go. And I think that what's basically going on here is that the tolerances are just so tight that by the time you try and reach across from this side of the fuselage to the other side, even though that's only about a ½ inch, that if there's any little bit of variance there, it's not going to want this edge right here is not going to want to just slide right into place on top of this ridge. So I ended up doing the same thing that I did on the right hand side. I relieved the edge of this thing here with the file. Same thing back here. I also made sure that these were completely flush, and that still did not quite get it. Still did not want to drop all the way in there. So I came back and again repeated the same thing here, where I put a little bit of a chamfer on this ridge, and it actually, I think, even could use a little bit more, but that it goes together now. So you'll also notice that I actually removed a little part of that ridge down there in that corner, because it just did not want to go completely together right there. And so what I've got now is a thing that will in fact go together the way that it's supposed to. So let me show you. All right, and I still have a little bit of flex in there somewhere. You can see that the bottom fuselage joint lays up pretty nicely, but the top, for whatever reason, and I haven't been able to figure out why, I don't think it's going to be a big deal, doesn't go together quite as easily. There's still a little bit of something in there, but it doesn't take much pressure to close it. So I think I'm going to be okay there. I just have not honestly been able to diagnose it, and I've worked at it. But what you can see is when you look down in there, on this side, that cockpit floor is all the way in. On this side, not so much. And what I've found that I have to do is put a little bit of pressure on the fuselage halves. And then if you look inside there, it's hard to see. I don't know. It's, again, without this thing in there, it would be easier. But kind of squeezing it together, and maybe if I get the light down here a little bit closer, you can see inside there, maybe. Okay, you can see that ridge, and if you squeeze on the sides of the fuselage a little bit, and then just reach in there and push on the cockpit floor, push a little bit, then it'll pop into place. And so now you can see that it's fully seated in there, and it's not a big deal. So again, it's hard to see down inside there. That's a little bit better view. You can see that ridge over there on towards the top of the screen. That's how it's supposed to go. So that's all good. I'm confident now that I've got the cockpit properly seated in there, and it's all good. And that is definitely an issue that I was getting warnings about from different people. So, well, so much for my little trick to keep that thing stuck in there. No big deal. This part, the structure for the tail wheel, no issue there. Those pieces drop in perfectly, and they don't cause any interference. The condition with the top of the fuselage not closing completely was there before that before these yellow pieces got put in. So no, they're not. That's not what's causing that. Okay, the last thing I really want to say about this part is, aside from all that, this was a lot of fun. This all of this stuff with the cockpit subassembly was just really wonderful. As far as the fit, the engineering was good. This honestly is one of the best I've ever seen, even if I take into account 1/32 scale stuff. I mean, literally all of the parts of this cockpit subassembly fit together just perfectly. It was really a lot of fun to put it all together. As you can see, one thing I did not do is use the photo etch that Eduard gives you for things like those placards on the side of the cockpit. They're just too thick. They just, it doesn't matter how well they're printed, they just don't look good. So I used a combination of Annie's decals and some Airscale decals, and just kind of made it look somewhat realistic. Same thing on top of the batteries and the radio there. Each one of those is just one of those little decals. I think that adds a lot of realism to it. Same thing over here on this side. I did use the photo etch on the rudder trim wheel and the elevator trim wheel rather, and the throttle quadrant. So right there and then right there, because those look pretty good. They kind of nestle down in place anyway, and the thickness of them is not as much of a penalty, so they don't look too bad. Also used the same magic wash that I've been doing, and that helps kind of define all that stuff. And then the last thing I did was come back with just a little bit of neutral gray oils to dry brush and highlight a lot of those edges and rivets, because that detail is just really so nice. Of course, unfortunately, even with that, it is all pretty much invisible when it's all said and done, because there's a turtle deck piece that goes across here, so none of that back there is going to be visible at all. So, but at any rate, now it's time to actually go ahead and glue this fuselage together. Okay, so here we go. A few days later, and the fuselage on this little Mustang is all glued up, and that was pretty predictable. The joints are pretty nice and tight, so hopefully my body work there will be pretty minimum. I'm going to lose the that little teardrop shaped detail that they had on the fuselage spine there, but not a big deal. I can replace it if I want to. It's not something I ever actually even noticed on Mustangs before. So overall, not too bad. Not too bad at all. And as you can see, I've been working on the wing. I've gone ahead and committed to the fit of the left wing, and I wanted to show you what I've done there. Because one of the problems that a lot of people seem to be having with this kit is the way that these little gun inserts go in, and I think these are pretty good because look, if you tried to mold those things into each half of the wing, then you've got a seam that runs across there that you've got to deal with, and I think that this is much better, because not only do you get the tips of the barrels and the blast tubes and whatnot already basically opened up for you, but now what you have to deal with is just this joint that runs around the perimeter of that piece. So I think that this is good engineering. I like it. But people have had problems with the fit, because they find that even with the wing halves fitting together correctly, that the distance between the outside surfaces of this little insert is too small, and so you end up with a step. And that's a hassle, because yeah, you're going to have to deal with this joint anyway, but you don't want it to be any worse than need be. And steps are always, you know, kind of a pain. So what I've done here, the issue, again, is to put a finer point on it. This is one of the little inserts, okay? And I think basically what's happened here is that this is the kind of part that when it gets pulled off of the mold and the core comes out of this inside area, that leaves the thing free to shrink and close up a little bit. And so this outside distance here becomes a little bit too small. And they've put these pins on here, which are kind of nice because they basically insert into these little grooves on each half of the wing. And that's fine. That helps position it, but it doesn't do anything to affect the outside dimension of, you know, the thing from top to bottom. So some people are cramming something in there to try and spread it apart. I don't know. That seems a little bit imprecise to me and a little bit of a hassle, even though doing it this way involves cutting 12 pieces of material. This is super simple. This is just 40 thousandths or 1 millimeter evergreen square stock. Just chop a bunch of them up, glue them on there, and now what you've got is these, you basically created a lip for both sides of the of that insert to slide over. If I can get this, there we go. So there you go. So that forces the sides of it to move outward, and it works pretty good because, as you can see on this one, I have it perfectly flush on top. That's what you want right there. And then mostly flush on the bottom. It's not as perfect as it is on the top, but still pretty good. And hey, that's one of those things, you chase it to the place where it's going to be seen the least. So now you may have also noticed that I've got something going on here with the leading edge right here. So what I did is I went ahead and glued this outer portion of the wing. I tried to shove it in as much as possible because the gap was just a little bit greater at the front than it was at the back. So I took care of that a little bit, but problem was, this is kind of ironic, right? After doing all that work to make sure that the top and bottom pieces of the wing can fit line to line and close up this joint right here, that when I do that, I get a step. And I think I may have talked about this in a previous clip, I can't remember, but it was real visible. I could see that I had a step that ran right along here. Well, I don't want that, obviously, and the simple thing to do was to put a 10 thousandths evergreen shim in there, but just towards the inside, closer to the root, because as you can see, it needs to fit line to line out there by that gun insert thing in order to be the correct thickness. So it all worked out fine, not a big deal. I'm going to have to dress the edge of that anyway, and I'm going to obviously have to re-drill that hole for the gun camera, but again, not a big deal. So I feel pretty good about all that. Just to close this out real quick, I want to just cover real briefly the materials that I've been using on some of these things, because I realized that I was forgetting that. So I've gone ahead and taken care of these lights. Some people choose to depict those as having colored covers. I don't know. I don't really know what it's supposed to be, but it kind of made more sense to me that the bulbs would be colored, because all three of those lenses can then be the same. And North American was all about efficiency and low cost. So I just did the bulbs, and I did that. The Eduard gives you a nice little dimple there to drop some paint into. And so I used these wonderful clears from MRP. green, yellow, and orange. I might have should have used red instead of orange. I've got it, but I don't know. Looks okay. So there's that. Then I just, after that was dry, I covered over the back of it with some Molotow ink from a Molotow chrome silver pen. So the one thing that kind of irritates me, I took the time before to go ahead and spray the final color around these openings, but that was probably a waste of time because the reason you do that is so you don't have to do precision masking. But as you can see, the rim of the lens is molded into the clear part, and I think I'm going to have to go back and mask and paint that anyway. So there you go. Now, one of the things that I like to do sometimes is I like to strengthen the inside of a fuselage joint because, like right here, I'm going to be doing some finishing and some scribing and so forth, and I want to make sure that that's plenty strong, and so I don't want this to be flexing at all right here. So what I do is I like to back that up with something to reinforce it. And what I typically will use is just a mixture of super glue and acrylic powder. Okay, so I had a little bit of an interruption there. I needed to go and fetch the acrylic powder that I was going to show you, but here's where I was using that. That's what I was talking about. See down there inside that, just a little bit to reinforce. It's probably overkill, probably not the kind of thing I really have to do or maybe even need to do, but yeah, I'm compulsive about gluing and strengthening. It's just an easy thing a little bit of easy insurance. Anyway, this is the nail powder. Okay, this is just acrylic powder. Comes in a bunch of colors. And what you can do is put the powder down and then wick extra thin cyanoacrylate into it. Makes a super hard and strong deposit. Now, if you watch some of Paul Budzik's videos, he takes acrylic powder, but he does dental powder because he's a dentist, and he mixes it up on a little palette and makes a putty out of it and then applies it. Now, every time I've tried to do that with this stuff, it just turns rock hard instantly, especially if I use the thin CA. And I just could not figure out what the issue was, so I posted about it on SMCG. I was like, dudes, what am I doing wrong? Well, a couple of guys were saying, well, maybe you need to use the actual real stuff, which is called Dentsply. This is also an acrylic powder, and I just have been under the assumption that there wasn't anything different about it other than they will only sell this stuff to dentists. It's hard to get, it's more expensive, and it's got these fibers in it. You can see that. It's got those pink fibers in it there to make it look more realistic, like, I don't know, veins or whatever. Anyhow, I was like, there's no way it can just be about the powder. Well, sure enough, I tested it, mixed this stuff up with some regular old Loctite super glue, because there was also some experimentation with what kind of, super glue, because all of this stuff has, it's just the same in name only. There's obviously individual recipes that are mostly the same, 90% the same. But here's the thing, with this powder, that 10% or whatever it is enough, because I cannot mix this stuff with super glue at all without it hardening. This stuff, I had plenty of time. I was able to stir it up into a nice kind of thick putty, and then put it in there. So I don't know, can't explain it, but it is one of those things. Chemistry matters. Okay, so with materials, all right, just to finish this up real quick, one thing you may have noticed is that right here, I went ahead and painted the outsides of those rear landing wheel doors. Hopefully that'll last. You can see it's pretty nice and reflective. I base coated those with the usual Mr. Color GX2. Gives you a nice glossy black, and then sprayed the AK477 chrome over the top of that. I find that this stuff is about the same as the all-clad 107 chrome, but this might be just a little bit more durable. You know, it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other in a situation like this, and I used the AK because it's what I had right there on the shelf. Another thing that I wanted to mention was that when I was busy assembling this dash thing, and I did, by the way, go ahead and look through some photos, and I found several that have these stiffeners, and I don't know why. I kind of feel like maybe this is the later block style, and since I'm making a generic Mustang right out of the factory, I don't really have to care about that. So maybe with the the reason that Eduard wants you to use the one without the ribs is because for the markings they've chosen, they know that it has the smooth style dash. Anyway, what I was going to say is one of the things you have to do when you assemble this instrument panel is you have to stick that fascia, or whatever you want to call it, in the middle portion of the panel, like right there where the yellow line and that red rectangular label is. You can see that's a separate piece. Okay, you have to glue that on there, and the problem is that especially with these gauge faces being glossed, which is super cool, you obviously have to be really careful with your glue, because you don't want to get it anywhere it doesn't need to be, and you know, with super glue or whatever spooging around under there, you stand a good chance of having that happen. So what I did is I thought, well, you know what? I've got this stuff that I'm using for the foil right here. I'll try this, because it essentially works a lot like contact cement. So that's exactly what I did. I put some of it on the back side of the photo etch, gave it enough time to dry so that it turned clear, and then just flipped it over and mashed it into place. And it worked great. Stuck right on there, and stuck pretty well. And probably would be enough. I decided to go ahead and come back and wick a little bit of extra thin CA underneath it just to make sure, because like I said, I am a compulsive overgluer. I have like these, I have paranoia about stuff just spontaneously falling apart someday, and so anyhow, but that's all good. So I think that covers all of the materials that I wanted to talk about that I've used here, and it's time to move on with this. You can see I've gone ahead and glued this wing together, and that's what that looks like. And when you let's see what happens. Let me just poke this little gizmo in there and see how that shapes up right here, live and on camera. Hopefully it'll do it. It was a pretty tight fit on the other one, which is good. That's kind of what you want. I may have to trim the length of those little stubs a little bit, but that's not bad. You can see a little bit, it's a little bit too high right there, so I'll pop that off and trim those down a little bit shorter so that they're not pushing quite as hard on that, but that's going to work fine. Okay, good enough for this episode. Let's move on. The next one, be getting into a bunch of body work. Not going to go through all that in detail, so hopefully by the next time you see this, that'll actually all be done. Anyway, as always, I appreciate you guys watching. Much love.